It's been a hell of a crypto market. These last few weeks, we've seen some very unexpected moves. Okay, but if we are to go back to basics here, if we are to remember kind of on the macro perspective, what works, we should remind ourselves that markets move when liquidity moves. And right now, it's also important to keep in mind that M2 is turning up. And this is the kind of thing, this is one of those big macro variables that could blow a little bit of life into a few key crypto projects that need it right now. Not all, I'm not saying all, but some altcoins that are sitting right now in just the perfect spots to benefit. Others are going to get left behind, of course, but this is not that kind of a bull market anymore. It's not that kind of a rising tide that lifts all ships. Only certain ships are going to be favored. And so in this video, I want to break down which altcoins look ready. I'm going to let you know why they stand out and how this rise in liquidity could shape out in the next few weeks and the next few months. But ultimately, the truth is pretty simple. When M2 money supply expands, we have only the strong altcoins that are going to feel that fresh liquidity. Welcome to the channel. My name is Maddie and this is Altcoin Buzz. Altcoins that will benefit from M2 or otherwise. If you choose to invest, I wish you well. Just remember, I am not a financial or investment advisor, which means this video is not official financial or investment advice. All right, so the good news is that the United States M2 money supply just hit a fresh new all-time high. And if we are to go by the numbers, if we're to go back and check out the historical charts, study those, we see that Bitcoin has always followed this particular variable. This chart here, is one of the strongest signals in crypto right now. M2 has climbed back all the way to $22.3 trillion. And it's also rising. Not only is that a new all-time high, but it's also rising at the fastest pace since mid-2022. This is a clear sign that we're seeing new liquidity in the United States that's starting to turn again. That matters, and that's significant because when M2 speeds up, risk assets rise. That's kind of a predictable outcome. Again, if we go back and we study the historical charts. By contrast, when M2 slows down, that's when crypto bleeds, crypto kind of being the archetypal risk asset. Right now, M2 is rising, though. That is the context. So there are certainly a few variables at play here that come together, not just strictly the money supply M2 figure, but the Fed is expected to keep cutting rates. That's something else that we have to keep in mind. And lower rates, just generally speaking, make borrowing cheaper, make it easier, which should also push money into assets with more upside, assets like BTC, and not all of them, but key altcoins. And then in addition, UBS also expects the Fed to start buying around $40 billion in treasury bills each month in early 2026. UBS, of course, is a top-tier global financial institution. They are based in Switzerland, but that's what they're calling for. And this would all kind of act like early stage quantitative easing, or QE, kind of like a monetary policy. That is where central banks try to stimulate the economy. And they do this simply by increasing the money supply while simultaneously lowering interest rates. And it seems to be exactly what's happening now. So if we consider the landscape that we're witnessing, it would seem that a surge in liquidity is coming. Now, this is not guaranteed. This is not the kind of thing that's public policy yet. But if we look to large institutions, we look to some of the smart money out there, they are expecting it. They are calling for it. And if the Federal Reserve were to cut rates and buy treasury bills at the same time, that would represent a jump in liquidity that would be pretty significant. That would be pretty big, actually. This would also weaken the dollar, yes, because higher M2, lower rates, and balance sheet tools often push the dollar down. That is a consequence. But a weaker dollar is not the end of the world. In fact, there are many advantages associated with a temporarily weaker dollar. And in the past, actually, a weaker dollar has fueled previous Bitcoin breakouts as well as altcoin runs. And outside of cryptocurrency, also just various rallies across different kinds of risk assets. And so this is why the next liquidity cycle matters as much as it does, because crypto reacts first when liquidity turns. If we think, for example, to 2016 and 2017, and then 4 years later, 2020 and 2021, rising M2 led to major bull runs. And that's what we're starting to see again, rising liquidity, rising M2. The market, as far as I can tell, as far as what analysts are saying, has not priced it in yet. And crypto, again, being just that quintessential risk asset, is the one that could benefit the most. So that's the context. That's kind of the theory economically. With that being said, here are some of the coins that could benefit most from these higher liquidity conditions and levels. We'll kick off here at number 1 with Solana and its token, of course, SOL, S-O-L. We just talked about this one in yesterday's video as well. A lot of favorable metrics that you can point to when it comes to Solana, but this is certainly one of the altcoins that can benefit from a rising M2. And there's a lot going for Solana. This is why it's part of the list. For example, having a spot ETF, that's going to make a pretty big difference. And remember, by the way, that there are already 7 SOL spot ETFs that are live, plus another 2 that are pending as I record this video. The VanEck SOL ETF was the most recent addition, but last week, the inflows for the SOL spot ETFs were very steady. The Bitwise SOL ETF is currently the most popular and successful one by the numbers. In that case, we have total AUM, or assets under management, that have closed in on $900 million. But then in addition to all the ETF stuff, there are still some other features that make Solana very attractive. So for example, and you probably already know this, but it's not the kind of thing that goes away, Solana offers fast and low-cost transactions. And that makes it easier for either new or returning capital to flow into its ecosystem more aggressively, especially once those macro conditions improve. All else being equal, that's an important couple of variables to consider there. And this, by the way, can be from both retail and institutions. Solana also already hosts a large and growing ecosystem. Of course, this includes dApps, DeFi platforms, and tokenized asset projects. XStocks ranks second on DeFi Llama's list of tokenized stocks and ETF protocols. It is active on Solana and Arbitrum, and this gives Solana real use, of course, beyond just speculation. With a current price of SOL, S-O-L, in the $130 range here, look, it's doing everything right at a fundamental level, and there is lots of room for Solana to grow. This Altcoin Buzz Spotlight video is sponsored by Sui. Because look, although the market has changed, Sui keeps pushing, and it keeps breaking records too. The Miston Labs team, which is the team behind Sui, they keep launching new products, and the ecosystem also keeps growing. Along with that, of course, we see all kinds of new statistics and metrics which keep reflecting new all-time highs for Sui. As a project, Sui is also killing it in all the big sectors it supports. Sectors like DeFi, where DEX volume keeps making new records with $175 billion. DEXs, perps, and inflows are all surging into year end. Institutions have gained regulatory custody plus liquidity support for SUI. For example, Crypto.com, they recently launched secure institutional custody solutions for SUI tokens. And of course, various native stablecoins are available on Sui. For example, the new native stablecoin USD SUI, that's by Stripe, Circle's USDC, SUI USDE in partnership with Athena, YLDS from Figure, and USDI, which is backed by BlackRock's tokenized money market fund BUIDL, B-U-I-D-L. Look, if you have not yet used Sui, or if you just haven't used them lately, come give it a try. And also follow Sui's X account for all the latest updates. Check out the links in the description of this video. The next altcoin that stands to benefit enormously from a rising M2 and increased liquidity is Ripple's XRP. And in the case of Ripple, and I suppose this is kind of a common denominator today, but we also have ETFs that are part of the discussion here. No fewer than 5 spot ETFs that are live and another 3 that are pending. Also, for XRP, Bitwise has the biggest spot ETF. However, actually, XRP ETFs already have a combined AUM of almost $1 billion, and almost 478 million XRP are currently locked in vaults. That's about 0.5% of all available XRP, or about 500 million of 100 billion XRP. So XRP was pre-mined, as you probably know. And look, honestly, that's one of the things I don't really like about XRP. There are, different opinions when it comes to that, but that's mine. I think that's an obvious opinion to hold. After 12 years, we still only have 60% of the max supply, which is in circulation, meaning that the remaining 40% or 40 billion XRP, unfortunately, in theory, can be dumped on its users at any time. We don't have any control over that, and that's not good. And whenever one of the Ripple founders or the foundation needs money, unfortunately, they can just dump 1 billion tokens. They've been known to do that in the past. They're kind of notorious for that, actually. But at the current XRP price of a little over $2 here, if they were to do that, I understand why the temptation is there. That is a quick and an easy $2 billion. So that's not a good thing. But still, despite this, XRP is going to benefit from the M2 price increase. There are plenty of charts that back this up. It's not just opinion. And so look, in the case of Ripple and its XRP token, I'm not the biggest fan of those kinds of tokenomics, but there's a lot of other stuff that's going this project's way. Next up, and maybe my personal favorite here on the list, is Chainlink and the LINK token, LINK. Last week, Grayscale launched the first ever LINK spot ETF, so that was big news. That was great to see. On its first day of trading, it saw a good $37 million worth of inflows. That's a great start to the whole Grayscale LINK ETF. We also have a Bitwise LINK ETF, which we're told should launch soon, so stay tuned for that. And then, of course, Chainlink as a project, of course, they have their CCIP. This is their cross-chain communication app. Currently, it connects over 70 chains, but additionally, Chainlink is also big, of course, into tokenization. And RWA, or real-world assets, kind of seems to be where the real money is and where it's lining up. That's according to the biggest financial advisors in the world, so institutions like BlackRock. When these kinds of financial big boys go full into RWAs, they know something's up. They're, arguably shaping the market itself. They're not just reacting, but they're actively shaping it. But either way, yeah, it's a space that is going to grow. Besides RWA, though, you can find Chainlink's oracles pretty much everywhere, all over cryptocurrency and outside of cryptocurrency, but in things like derivatives, DeFi, gaming, and payments as well. And with expanding liquidity, demand for that infrastructure very likely will surge. Institutions are also moving capital on chain, of course, and all of this benefits LINK directly. So keep an eye on the price of this token. It's currently around $14, which I consider to be kind of the steal of the century. I don't think it's going to be this low for too much longer. All right, and last but not least here, we are rounding out this list of altcoins that are going to benefit massively from the M2 money supply expanding with Ethereum and ETH. After Bitcoin, the ETH spot ETFs were the second set that the SEC approved. Currently, there's a list of well over 40 Ethereum-related spot ETFs. Total AUM in this capacity is $17.95 billion. And so Ethereum, of course, along with Bitcoin, really does represent one of the crypto spot ETF OGs. And Ethereum saw, with the recent Fusaka upgrade, a whole potential game changer. Check out our dedicated video on the subject, by the way. But the result was that Ethereum became faster, cheaper, and more scalable. Another result of that upgrade, by the way, is the fact that L2s now need to pay real fees to Ethereum, which just means that Ethereum can burn more ETH, which can lead to Ethereum, hopefully, becoming deflationary again. Then we also have Tom Lee's Bitmine, which just keeps buying more and more ETH for its treasury. In fact, straight after the Fusaka launch, it bought for another $200 million worth of ETH. It now holds 3.5 million Ether, and at the current ETH price of a little over $3,000, that's worth about $11 billion. Tom Lee, very much for Ethereum, is what Michael Saylor is to Bitcoin. Perhaps you could argue that Tom Lee is even more bullish because last week, for example, he called for a $62,000 ETH price. It's not going to happen tomorrow or next week, but if things line up the way he suspects they will, and they should, that's what he's calling for, $62,000. Let me know your thoughts about that in the comments below, whether or not one day Ethereum is going to hit that price. I think it's realistic. It just depends on what kind of a time scale that we're talking about. Let me know in the comments below. Also, be sure to join us on social media. Those discussions are happening on X and Discord. You can find those links in the description of this video.